Excuse me. Our last speaker here for today here is Dennis Moroney, and I think Dennis is one of the first guys I met coming to Arizona or involved in some of these things. He actually spoke at Maricopa Ag Center. I remember that day. It was kind of like everybody that worked there at Maricopa Ag Center was trying to figure out what was going on, because there was like about 70 people in the. It was amazing, the turnout there. I'm not sure where they all came from, but there was so much interest that everybody around there was wondering where they were. And Dennis was on the program then, but what I've appreciated about Dennis over the years is that he's always been trying to, be profitable with his animal agriculture while also being very conscientious about the environment of the rangeland in terms of, making sure that it's sustainable and very productive for this generation and the next generation. And we're fortunate to have Dennis here, and I know he does direct marketing, one of the few that's been able to. A lot of people come and go in the direct marketing arena, but Dennis has been at it a long time, so he's got a lot of. So his beard there is how you measure his experiences, right? And
it's not the length, it's the color.
It's the color. It's probably both, right?
It's all about Wi-Fi reception.
Yeah. So I'm going to see if I can get your.
That would be good.
Your slides going up here.
Okay.
So you want me to stop this here or keep
No,
going?
if it started, we'll just go right there.
Okay.
That'll work well.
Okay.
Okay, so I appreciate that introduction, Russ. I'll just tell you, for starters, I did not grow up on a ranch. There are many people that will stand up in front of a group and say they're a 6th generation or a 5th generation, such and such, and all that. Well, I didn't get to choose my parents. It's funny how that works sometimes. I grew up in Phoenix when it was less than 100,000 people, and Maricopa County was the 6th largest agriculture producing county in the nation. So I had the advantage of being able to be in 4-H and take agriculture classes in high school and things like that. And the hook was set by those activities. By the time I was 10 or 11, I had my own business. I had a paper route, and I got the paper route in order to finance the purchase of a 4-H calf, and that was a slippery slope that I really never recovered from to any degree. So just a few quick words in terms of my background, or why in the heck would I be asked to address a group like this. I had 34 years as an agriculture teacher, teaching 14 years at the high school level in Washington State, and then another 20 years as an adjunct faculty at Prescott College, Yavapai College, and Cochise College, while ranching full-time during that period of time. I have a BS, whoops, you're not supposed to call it that. I have a BS in animal science and a second one in ag education and a master's in technical and some other kind of education. Anyway, I'm supposed to be a pretty smart guy as far as education goes. My first direct marketing experience was as a student at U of A, selling dressed rabbits. So we had a little place outside of Tucson, and we did what we could do at that time on a small scale as a student. So I worked at the U of A Campbell Avenue Farm, which is now called the Campus Ag Center, and these rabbits were really productive, and I would just every once in a while kind of thump them and put them in a little paper plate with some saran wrap on them and take off to sell them to my co-workers at the farm. And one thing led to another. After I graduated, I took a teaching job on the Yakima Indian Reservation, just south of Yakima in Washington State, and we started raising sheep there and direct marketed lambs. And that was my first, I guess what I would call livestock direct marketing experience. Then later, 6 years of Yakima Valley, we moved to Western Washington to the Snoqualmie Valley. My wife was accepted to medical school at the University of Washington, so I spun from being a production agriculture teacher to teaching horticulture and forestry. And the horticulture program was all about direct marketing. We essentially had a student co-op where the students would raise plants. They would have their own project, their own section of greenhouse space and so forth. And we were fortunate to be in a school district where I was able to build 2 new greenhouses. We had almost 5,000 square feet of greenhouse space, and students would they were required to have a project, but the proceeds from their project would pay for them to be able to go to state convention and national convention and things of that sort. And it became a really popular class because kids would end the school year with several $100s in their pocket, plus lots of goodwill around the community, and we had a big giant spring plant sale and so forth. After my wife finished her residency, we moved back to Arizona, and she had one externship that she was required to do, where she spent a summer working with some physicians in Prescott who offered her a job. So that summer, I just thought, as a sort of mental exercise, I would go and look at ranches that were for sale, because I really was interested in getting back to my first love. And just before we were scheduled to go back to Washington, I thought I could learn more if I made an offer on a ranch and just see how that all worked. You know, I knew they wouldn't take my offer, but I would learn a lot from it. And I got a call from the realtor not long after that. Congratulations. I said, for what? He said, well, you just bought an Arizona cattle ranch. And I said, what? So I left my education job in February of that school year after having made that offer in July or August, and what a ride it's been since then. That was 30 years ago. And so anyway, what we do is we raise primarily cattle and sheep, and we sell all natural, range-fed beef and lamb direct to the consumer at 2 farmers markets, one in Bisbee and one in Sierra Vista. Then we're also in 2 food co-ops, one in Sierra Vista and one in Tucson, the Food Conspiracy Co-op in Tucson. And then some small restaurants and grocery stores around Cochise County. So each of those means of selling directly has benefits and detriments, but overall, what I found, and I had worked my way through college by being a horseshoer and cowboy and working. As soon as I got out of high school, I had a friend whose family owned a ranch up in Wickiup, so between Wickenburg and Kingman, and so I started working for them. And anyway, I thought, a lot of experience, but when you're an employee, it's way different than when you're the owner. And what I was trying to do was pattern my business and my approach to things in the way that my neighbors were doing. And I found that it was pretty much, it would have been a lot better to just take all your assets, convert them to cash, dig a little pit, and throw the money in there, throw a match on it, and we could cook a few hot dogs and it would be over, because there was no way you could do the cow-calf business without being saddled with continuous debt. And so I shifted gears fairly early in the game on this ranch in Prescott. We were on it was a 50,000 acre forest permit with only a small amount of deeded land, and the Forest Service as the landlord. I'm not going to talk about that today unless you ask me specific questions, but it's a path. It's a good way to get started if you have a tough skin and you're quick on your feet in terms of responding to the inquisitors that in the green uniform. Oops, I started to read. April Fools. Anyway, at this point, the products that we sell to the public are beef and lamb, and then wild-caught sockeye salmon from Bristol Bay in Alaska, organic peanut butter, and wool and yarn. Now, what's the connection there? It's all protein. The salmon came about because of a kind of a funny friendship that formed. There was a Inuit woman. That was me when I was young, by the way, when it all looked pretty easy. Anyway, we have a disorganization in Cochise County, Cochise and Santa Cruz County, called Southeast Arizona or Baja Arizona Sustainable Agriculture. It's primarily oriented toward promoting the use of desert foods, including mesquite beans, which we have our own hammer mill, and we have mesquite millings in the fall and so forth. But at one point, this woman from Naknek, Alaska, who had come to the U of A to study law in order to defend her tribal rights to the fishery that their generations of their family had been involved in, became our executive director for Baja Arizona Sustainable Agriculture. And one day we started talking. She said, "Would you like to trade some steak for some salmon?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I lived in Washington for 14 years. I had developed a bit of a taste for it. So, long story short, we're in the salmon business big time because our customers really like this wild-caught sockeye. Peanut butter started for me when we were doing a farmer's market on campus at U of A quite a long time ago, probably 2002 or 3, something like that, maybe 2004. But a lot of students would be on their way to a class and they would say, "Do you have anything that's ready to go? I can't stop, and I've got 3 more classes this afternoon. I can't buy anything frozen." And we came across this idea, what if I had a peanut butter grinding machine, and so we just started buying organic peanuts at the co-op and running them through the peanut butter machine and selling them. And it became a big hit with the vegan people and the people that didn't do meat and other people that just like good peanut butter. The wool and yarn obviously is a byproduct of the sheep, but my wife also is an addict. I shouldn't tell her secrets, but she calls herself a fiber artist. So she's a weaver, a knitter, a spinner. If there's fiber involved of any kind, and I mean from yucca fiber to, anything that'll string together and twist together and can be braided, or she's into it. So we sell quite a bit of yarn. In the past, we've had goats, pigs, chickens that we sold eggs from. We do periodically have pecans that we sell direct to our customers, and and sometimes we have overflow from our garden, so we'll just bring extra squash or other things, eggplant and things like that, from home to sell at the market, because the farmer's market's fairly fluid. Anyway, in terms of principles, from my perspective, I try to operate using principles that provide good tools beyond emotion for making decisions. And I use two sort of matrices for doing this. One is holistic management and the other is permaculture. And both of those I find to have been very helpful guidelines for analyzing finances, looking at resource impacts, looking at proposing a particular action, and then considering what the ramifications of that action might be in terms of our human quality of life, as well as the animals' quality of life and well-being, and then the sustainability aspects for the land and resource consumption and so forth. So the main thing we're here to discuss today is marketing, and direct marketing in particular. And I would say that with 2 farmers markets a week and a Facebook page dedicated to our product, we're getting pretty good at marketing this stuff. And it is the key to being financially secure and independent. Cattle in particular are subject to what I would consider to be an illegal monopoly. I call them the meat cartel. But there's 4 multinational corporations that really honestly and truly control somewhere between 80 and 90% of the global meat supply. And they are bold-faced price fixers and colluders and so forth. And at this point, we have a Packers and Stockyards Act, a Sherman Antitrust Act, and so forth, that are tools that could be used to check the monopoly power that these meat companies have. But so far, very little has been done to rein them in. And that is unfortunate. How cool. We had the picture of a guy with handmade reins just when I see the, oh, never mind. That's another April Fool's thing. Anyway, I don't know any other way that you can get around that issue. If you take the easy path, which is common for most people that would describe themselves as cattle ranchers, and in many cases even sheep and goat producers, to haul those animals to market by going to the livestock auction, I can almost guarantee that you will not get what the animals are worth. It's just not going to happen. And I've played that game for years, trying every different way that I could think of to steer around that dilemma. And the best thing I ever did, and I really not at all sorry, is to shift my mindset from the idea that we are cow-calf producers to say, wait a minute, we are food producers. And we're producing a particular product that our customers tell us that they want. They want an all-natural product that isn't produced with artificial hormones, that isn't produced with subclinical levels of antibiotics, that isn't produced with confinement and a very limited diet for animals to come through a factory model which says that an animal is ready to slaughter at 14 months of age, and that in order to get to that point they have to be manipulated to a certain extent through a diet that has ever increasing amounts of carbohydrate, so that they start with an all roughage diet going into the feedlot. They are conditioned for about 30 days, and then they introduce grain. It'll be corn, milo, barley, or depending on other parts of the country, it could be other cereal grains, but those are the primary ones. And generally speaking, the feedlot diet is similar enough across the country that the results are pretty predictable. Performance can be charted, and expectations are within fairly narrow parameters. In order to be successful at that, you need inputs that are very uniform. So you need truckload lots of same age, same weight, same gender cattle, preferably with the same hide color, no horns, no spots, and we've seen an incredible drift away from a variety of cattle breeds that evolved with humankind over tens of thousands of years to Black Angus, Red Angus, or crosses with Black Angus and Hereford, or Black Angus and Charolais, but essentially Northern European origin cattle that have predictable feedlot performance. The problem is there have been a number of health issues that have become associated with eating of red meat, not because red meat in and of itself is a bad thing, but the way that some animals are produced, the majority of animals, and most of the meat that's offered in the supermarket has the wrong kinds of fat, for one thing. And so you're getting, the reason they feed subclinical levels of antibiotics in the feedlot, it's administered through the water in the feedlot, is because when you get to 50 and 60% carbohydrates in your diet, the gut of a ruminant, which is supposed to be made up of billions of microbes that are doing the digestion of roughage feeds, is overwhelmed by the degree of concentrates, and you create an inflammatory system in the gut. And so these animals are always have something akin to an irritable bowel syndrome. And the meat produced from them, my humble opinion, it's just not, it doesn't have any flavor, or has a particular flavor, which is going to be the same whether you are in Omaha or Amarillo or New York City or San Francisco or LA or Phoenix. It's the same. And no trace back, no accountability. You know, you may have a branded product that came through a packing house and then was directly sold to the grocery store chain. We have no idea who the original producer was, and so forth. So that's my soapbox portion of this presentation. The thing that I think we need to talk about is, oh, did I do something?
No, I just.
Oh, I touched it.
No,
Oh, okay.
I just
Okay.
I went to sleep.
Those are olives, by the way. So, a couple of things in terms of principles that I feel are important. With marketing, you're selling something. But if you're selling something that somebody else wants, it's not a hard sell at all, it's an easy sell. People will come up and they'll say, how do you raise your animals? And I just tell them the story about how we raise the animals. They are grazing on 25,000 acres of native rangeland that ranges from 4,000 to 6,500 feet. That is in a very diverse area in terms of soils, and therefore in terms of the plant community. We have good science to back up what we sell, and I'll tell you that in a little bit. But it's mostly about telling the story, educating your customers, We're constantly telling people different ways to cook, different cuts of meat, addressing their concerns. Well, I did this and it was a little tough. So, well, how long did you cook it? How hot was it? So on and so forth. So it's very much developing a relationship with your customers. I would say that we're at about 75-25 in that probably 75% of our customer base are repeat customers buying every week or every couple weeks. 25% are new people that are coming in and trying things for the first time. We try to have a very broad selection of products. So I take 3 freezers, maybe the size of this lectern or larger. They're, you know, this wide, this tall, this deep. And I have a trailer that I pull that has a solar panel on the roof, an inverter and charge controller and battery bank inside, and the meat stays frozen all day. We run a cash register on solar, and we can have 30 different beef products, probably a dozen different lamb products, 3 or 4 pork products. I purchase pork from the guys that run the Wilcox meat packing. We have two forms of nitrite-free bacon and pork breakfast sausage and pork chorizo that we get from them. Anyway, so the production methods, I think, is the first place where we need to sort of take a little bit of time and talk about that. On the cattle, we rotate them through 22 pastures on the ranch during the course of the year. So one reason we can get away with using no wormer, no insecticides, no herbicides is that the animals are moving. And you have most internal parasites have a 21 to 28 day life cycle. So if we can move those animals every 3 to 4 weeks to new fresh pasture, and if we're leaving behind a bristly surface, so the old range management sort of thumb rule is take half, leave half. When you leave half, you've got cover, and when the next precipitation event that occurs, that moisture is more likely to go into the soil than if you've slicked off the whole pasture to something that's an inch or a half inch tall. And so, in addition, by timing your rotation and designing a rotation that looks at the plant community during the course of the year, many of those plants have a time when they're very palatable and very nutritious, and other times when they're not even sampled. So I've been working with a young lady who is just now writing her dissertation for her PhD. She's been working with us since 2013. She has collared over 200 cattle with GPS locating collars that put out a signal every 10 minutes for millions of data points. It was a very cumbersome data set to work with, but what we've learned is where the animals go within a pasture, at what time of day, how much time do they spend grazing at night, how much time do they spend on water. They will spend a fair amount of time in the middle of the day where they come back down, get a big drink of water, and then in a ruminant animal, they have 4 stomachs, so they're regurgitating what they ate in the previous 3 or 4 or 5 hours, and then re-chewing that and swallowing it, and it goes into the rumen where that healthy gut microflora goes to work breaking down the cellulose and the more undigestible components of their diet. In addition to that sort of gross look at their diet selection and grazing behavior, we also took fecal samples only from animals that had a collar on, so that there would be a correlation between the behavior of the ones that were making dots on the map and the ones that were eating the plants. So observation of the animal, when it defecates, grabbing a sample right away, sending those samples to a lab, collecting plants in the area where they've been grazing, and sending the plants in for laboratory analysis, so that we're looking for these fatty acid compounds that are known to be a part of the plant community, showing up in the feces, and then collecting fat samples from every steer that's been slaughtered for the last 6.5 years. So fat samples from the tailhead and from the ribeye area. And when you have the same fatty acid compounds from a plant showing up in the fecal analysis and then showing up in the fat, you can be darn sure that what you're eating when you eat the meat is what we would call the terroir of the land, or the flavor of that landscape. Then, on top of that, now, none of this would have been possible, you know, when I was an undergrad. But today, with the genetic code of these animals, the DNA sequenced and available, we can do DNA analysis on each individual plant. So we were getting back monthly printouts showing the percentage of the fecal sample made up of each of these different plants. So among some of the surprises that I learned, having already been ranching for more than 20 years, in May and June, I had a group of about 90, no, not that many, about 75 steers, but who were consuming more than 90% of their diet just from mesquite. And yet I have neighbors that have been spending small fortunes trying to eradicate mesquite from their ranches because it's a weed, and it's an unwanted plant, and it's taking water away from the grass. And we're going, hey, the leaves are 11% protein, the pods are 16% protein, and very high in digestible energy, and they gain on that stuff. So we've made friends with the mesquite. We've agreed to disagree on certain things like bicycle tires, and but at the same time, we're good to go on. We did set up this analysis with 5 seasons, and so one of our seasons was we would go winter, spring, pre-monsoon, monsoon, fall, and that pre-monsoon time frame is one of the most harsh times to be a grazing animal in this southwestern desert because of lack of moisture, high winds that dry out all the forage and so forth. So that was, why is that one not, let's give that one a little, that's not a touch screen, is it? It's supposed to move. Okay. Well, it should. Or maybe we don't know. Okay. I'll only worry about it one more time right now.
Maybe we have to start.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe I pressed it hard enough this time that the little block went away. So yeah. So I think we're okay. All right. So our principles are, in addition, I already said all natural all the time. 100% guarantee of customer satisfaction. If somebody comes back to me and says, hey, this steak was tough, this hamburger was too lean, this sausage didn't taste right, anything, I don't care what it is. My view is the customer's always right. And so I always tell them, I'll either give you your money back, or I'll give you a like value package of meat, and let's take another run at it. And that has meant that instead of having people bad-mouthing our product behind our backs and telling people it was terrible and stuff. We have people that just, they tell their friends, and you know, we just have an ever-expanding customer base, which is really great. So in addition to that, we can't do what we do without good range management, great range management, and that's not bragging about me, but the thing is, you've got to be out there and aware of what's happening. And your animals, to a certain extent, are your barometer. When they are healthy, when they're doing well, when they're unstressed, when they're not overloaded with insects or any, you know things are going well. And so we used to go through very laborious processes to clip and weigh forage and do a lot of things. We've gotten to the point where we talk about the art and science of range management. The science is there and it's credible and it's doable, but the art is something that you, every single time I'm out on the ranch for any reason, I'm monitoring. I'm visually assessing the condition of the plants, the stage of growth that they're in, looking for areas of bare soil, looking for any sign of accelerated erosion after a storm, things that these are little check dams here. We've put in over 2,500 rock check dams on the ranch. They're just little places they put in gullies, little rock structures that slow the water velocity down and allow the silt and sand to settle out and rebuild the soil in those gullies and allow for more infiltration into the land. So we speak in terms of effective precipitation or efficient precipitation. So I'd rather have a 1/4 inch of rain a week all year round than have a 4-inch gully washer in the middle of August, where much of that, no matter what we do, is going to run off and go downstream. So I can't change anything about the weather patterns, but we can change our readiness to receive whatever it is that we get. And I think that's a really important point. Another thing I think is that you have to be honest with your customers and you have to be transparent. So pre-COVID, we were constantly hosting tours of folks that wanted to come out and see how we do what we do. I've published lots of articles in different publications, you know, where I just kind of tell our story in a different format. Branding, I think, is important. The USDA, probably no surprise to any of you, but I believe that it's been compromised or co-opted by big industry at the expense of the small-scale, family-scale producer. And so we have a registered trade name. It's Sky Island Brand. If any meat from our animals is sold, it has Sky Island Brand label on it. And it's like, well, but I got grass-fed at Co-op, I mean at Costco, or I got grass-fed at Walmart, or grass-fed at Fry's. Well, okay, so where was that raised? What kind of country was it raised in? What kinds of plants did they eat? What was the breed of cattle? All those things make a difference. So we have decided that we're going to be more like wine and cheese producers as opposed to commodity beef producers. You know, if you buy whole-shelled corn, you can pick up a kernel of corn and you've seen one, you've seen them all, pretty much. I mean, there may be slight differences with regard to variety or dryness and things like that. What we're doing is raising a very unique set of animals. These animals' origins are from North Africa. They were originally from the Atlas Mountains of Morocco and Algeria, when those people who were, history books referred to them as the Moors, or the people from Morocco. But they invaded Spain in the 11th century and ruled Spain for almost 500 years. So their livestock, the churro sheep, the criollo cattle, Spanish barb horses, most of the donkeys that we see in the Southwest, all were part of the gift that came to the Western Hemisphere when the Spanish and the Portuguese started colonizing North and South America. The cattle that we have now were purchased by the U.S. Department of Agriculture for an experimental range over by Las Cruces to look at suitability for a breed of livestock that could be grazed in the Southwest under the kind of predictions that existed for impending climate change and long-term drought. And the churro sheep have the same origins. And so for that reason, we're raising these kinds of animals because they're extremely well desert adapted. One of the characteristics that they have is because they came from a desert region, they don't need thermal cover or temperature, insulation. Northern latitude origin cattle that have cold, wet winters need a rind of fat to help keep them warm in those harsh conditions. So fat deposition, or the storage of surplus energy on these desert adapted cattle, is happening intramuscularly, where it's quickly metabolized when it's needed, but when it's stored and the animal is harvested at the right stage, abundance of marbling is a big factor in this meat. So going from branding to inspection, to sell to the public, we are required by law to process under inspection. State inspection or federal inspection is acceptable. There are slight differences between the two, but for all intents and purposes, they're looking for the same things. So we use primarily the University of Arizona, partly because I am an alum. I went through that program. I had, I don't know, maybe 6 semesters of meat classes, so I understand meat a little bit, and I like working with the U of A because we can conduct research and utilize their facilities to give us science-based feedback on whether or not we're doing a good job. So in addition to drawing fat samples from every one of these steers, we've also been tenderness testing every one. And we have, so there's a test, a USDA test for tenderness called the Warner-Bratzler Shear Force Test. It costs me 1 ribeye to do the test from every steer. So you take a ribeye between the 12th and 13th rib on the animal when it's still hanging in the cooler, take it into the lab, they cook it in an electric grill to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's got to be that same temperature for every single test. That's why it's an electric grill and not a charcoal barbecue or something like that. And then take a 1/2-inch plug cutter, take 8 plugs out of the ribeye muscle after this has cooled to room temperature. Turn them sideways and put them one at a time into this machine, the shear force tester, and pull the lever, and it shears this muscle tissue and measures the resistance to shearing. The smaller the number, the more tender the muscle. The larger the number, the tougher that the meat is. So we have been consistently testing at very tender in terms of tenderness. That's a level of tenderness. It's the most tender that USDA recognizes for a piece of meat. So one of the things that we always got as feedback from our customers is, what are you looking for in a steak? Well, I want something that's tender and flavorful. Okay, now we've got marbling in there that adds flavor. The marbling is little bits of fat. Well, it turns out little bits of fat, have these fatty acid compounds that have terpenes and flavonoids and different kinds of compounds that have their unique chemical signature that comes to us as a flavor sensation. So when you have tenderness and flavor, you're doing pretty well. Now there's other factors that you have to consider. We lose all control when we deliver these animals to the processor. If they have poor methods for handling the animals can be stressed out, they can have a big spike of cortisol, which can cause muscle tension and rigor, and you could have an animal ruined by poor handling techniques at the processor level, and it's ultimately out of your hands. So the highest standard, one that if I weren't so old I would aspire to now, but I think it's just too late for me, but is to have your own processing facility where you control every single step. And maybe one of the best ways, when we first started doing this, there was a guy that would come to the ranch, and he had just his pickup truck, and he pulled a trailer that had a little A-frame hoist on it, and he would say, "Now which steers are we going to do today?" And I'd say, "Well, these two in the corral here." And then he would take his 22 and he would just wait very patiently. And when the animal would put his head down to eat or something, he'd just pop it right, at the right spot. And it doesn't kill the animal, it stuns them. And this may be too much for you to hear, but if you have like a little X between the eye on this side and the ear on this side, and then the opposite on the other, there's a spot right in the middle that is just the right spot for them to drop like a rock. Their heart is still beating. Technically they're alive, but they are totally stunned, and they're unresponsive to any kind of, you could pinch them or poke them or do anything, they're out. And then this guy would go ahead and bleed them out and hoist them up on the deal and skin them, and then haul the sides into town, and they would be cut up there. No stress in the lead up to the moment when they are killed, which is really great. Unfortunately, it's a little more dramatic at the Food Products and Safety Lab at the University of Arizona, and a little more dramatic at Wilcox Meatpacking, but it's the best that we can get right now. And there's several people that have done amazing research just on what can happen between the time that you open the gate on your trailer and the animal steps out at the processor and the time that you pick up your meat. Temple Grandin, who's an animal science professor at Colorado State University and happens to be autistic, has been one of the most incredible people making a contribution in that manner to the idea of thinking like a bovine or thinking like a sheep, and how the way that we structure our infrastructure for animal handling and animal behavior can be beneficial or harmful in terms of both animal welfare and the food quality, and then therefore human health. So that is what I'll say for the moment about processing. Presentation, or how you present the product to the customer, is super important. When we first started doing this, the norm was paper wrap. So you have white butcher paper or sometimes tan butcher paper, and you have a stamp with the name of the cut on it. And if that's for home use, you have the luxury to open the package, see how it looks, see if that's what you want to eat tonight, and you can fold it, put it back in the freezer and get something else. But if you're at the farmer's market or the person shopping at the food co-op or the grocery store, they want to see what that cut looks like. They want to see how thick it is, how much fat might be on the outside, how much marbling, what the color of the meat is, and so forth. So we are using clear plastic, where U of A has a process called cryovac. Wilcox uses one which is shrink wrap. It's plastic, therefore it's petroleum, therefore it's not biodegradable. It's not my first choice from a sustainability and environmental standpoint, but it is a very good choice in terms of giving the customer the ability to choose. So when somebody says, I'm interested in getting some ribeyes, I don't put out one ribeye. I put out 5 or 6 packages, and then they say, oh wow, that one right there, I really like that one. Or they'll ask me, what do you think about this one? And I can tell them. So the visual is really important. We don't give samples or do samples at the market just because the process is a little bit cumbersome. But if I do, you know, in situations where I've been able to give people samples, you don't have to say a word. People will just, I want that cut, I want that, you know. It's like, because their senses are engaged and they're getting really positive signals. But I think packaging matters. When we sell a quarter, whole, or half of an animal, it's paper wrapped. If I sell to restaurants, often we sell the whole side, or in the case of a lamb, the whole lamb, and then their butchers do the cutting in-house. Some of the restaurants that we work with like to age for longer periods of time than we typically would do, or they have special ways that they age the meat, where they do it in a bag, and you know, just different things that they like to do. So to me, you try your best to give your customer what they want or what they think they want. Sometimes people don't know. In terms of sales, we take cash, check, or charge card. Square has changed the whole business, because people that would open their wallet up and say, I've got 20 bucks, so I'll buy this. When they know that you take a card, they'll get $20 worth of this and $40 worth of that, and 2 of those, and a salmon and some peanut butter, and you know, and pretty soon, you just, it's flowing, and it's kind of nice, and it's not outrageously expensive. We also barter. And we'll trade, especially with other farmers market vendors. So I have had the benefit of eating some fabulous goat cheeses and excellent sourdough bread, fresh vegetables, salads, ceviche, I mean, all kinds of things that we might not otherwise have obtained. And so one reason I like the farmers market is it is truly a gathering of the village to exchange goods and services, and that's, for me, that's pretty fun. You have to have some infrastructure to be in this business, and that means infrastructure for handling the animals, so fences, corrals, places to load, roads to get from one place to another, water lines, water storage, drinkers with float valves. The animals need water 365 days of the year, and we're in a desert, and so you've got to have thought that goes into developing that infrastructure, and you have to be constantly vigilant. So in the dry months of the year, we have somebody that makes a water run at least every other day and is checking waters, because float valves get broken. We've had bears get into a drinker and decide to play with the float and chew, you know, bite holes in the float and everything and break the float. And somewhere I have pictures of a bear that I scared, and you know, he was just having fun. But stuff happens, and overnight you can drain 10,000 gallons of stored water that might take 4 or 5 days to pump to make up for that. We're okay for now, right? Or
Yeah, we've got
okay.
another 5 minutes.
Okay, that's all I need. So, transportation for getting your meat someplace. I mean, I've gone from hauling cardboard boxes full of frozen meat in the back of a pickup truck 60 miles in summer temperatures to get home, to get it loaded into a freezer and have, you know, the top inch or two of the meat already thawing. So now I have some better ways to haul things. I have a Sprinter van that everything's shaded and not wind blown, and you can turn the air conditioner on pretty high and everything stays fairly cool. Let's see. We have a web presence in the form of a Facebook page that it has the same name as our brand name, so it's Sky Island Brand. If you went on Facebook and just did your little search out on Facebook, Sky Island Brand, our page would pop up, and it's an interactive page, so we respond to the customer. We give notification of specials that we're offering. We talk about, you know, that we have a quarter beef still available if somebody wants to buy a quarter, and you need to bring $50 deposit to the market and pay, you know, It's just, you know, and if you wanted copies of handouts that we usually have at our table where we sell, we'll send you copies by email or text and so forth. But that's how we interact with people rather than constantly answering the phone. It's easier for us because we're often out working when we're not doing a farmer's market, because you can't, I mean, you still gotta, you gotta run the ranch, or I gotta run the ranch. So let's see, I think low stress livestock handling is another thing that understanding animal behavior and their natural inclination to do certain things means in most cases we're trying to work these animals quietly, slowly, not ramming and jamming them, not all this hollering and dogs barking and stuff. I use dogs. I have two kinds of dogs. I have white dogs and black and white dogs. The white dogs are sheep guardian dogs, and their job is just to live with the sheep and keep predators away. And the black and white dog's a border collie, and her job is to mind well and just keep the bunch together as we're moving along, and no barking, no drama, everything's just kind of, you know. And occasionally we get people that come out to help us, and they've watched too many movies and they think that you're supposed to constantly be woo, woo, whistling and yelling and get on down, go on down there, go on, get him, dog. And that's what drives me nuts, because you don't move these animals by barking at them. You know, you move them by your physical presence. They have a bubble around them, and you move close to their bubble, they want to move away. If you move in front of the point of their shoulder, they're going to slow down, or they're going to turn right. If you move close to the point of their shoulder, they're going to do the same thing. If you come behind them a little, behind that point of their shoulder, they'll start to move faster. And that, once you start seeing that happen, and you realize, I mean, I've had the experience of moving 400 head of cattle with 2 people horseback, you know, and crossing a highway. And it's terrifying when it's happening, but what you have to, the conditioning and the natural innate behavior of your animals. The other piece of that is when you have an animal who's a little outside the box, you have to make a decision. Are the quirks that this animal has going to be beneficial or useful in the long run, or are they going to be something that causes us to have problems? And so animals that are too fast, too nervous tempered, too vigilant, they're watching me from 100 yards away, and I'm like, no, some of these guys got to go. The ones we want are the ones that are docile. And I like to be able to work them on foot I do a lot of work on foot, sorting them. You know, and I don't like the idea of being run over by a cow or a bull, or, you know, that can happen, but it's not in our, doesn't meet our quality of life standards. So I think I'll stop there. If you had any questions at all, I'd be happy to answer them, but I think I've pretty much covered what I wanted to share with you today. I think it's a fun business on a good day, and it can be. That's a guy that came back with his little project that he had made with wool that he bought from us, and people often come back. Those are some of my grandkids. Anyway, so I'll take any questions that you might have. Yes, sir.
How many people work at your organization, the ranch?
Well, it kind of sort of ebbs and flows a little bit. So I'll just tell you, I'm a shameless exploiter of youth. Okay, as a former teacher, it just comes naturally.
My father did that.
Yeah, so my kids, we built 2,500 check dams in part because you want to use the car to go out on Saturday night. We need 3 check dams finished this week. And, you know, so those kinds of things. So technically, we have, right now I have 1 employee who's a full-time cowboy. I have an intern who just finished a Master's of Fine Arts at Brown University, and she is also an addict. She's a fiber artist. So her partner has 1 more semester to finish up his degree, and so she wanted to come here and work with us to learn more about the sheep and the fiber and all that. So she's being paid a stipend, but not as much as a full-time employee. But she works, she helps out at the farmers markets, but she also, at the farmers market, she's knitting whenever she's not doing something else. And you can't believe how these fiber mavens, they're like, what are you making? Oh, are you? And they're like going through the wool, and the next thing you know, out goes a couple of skeins of wool, and by the way, maybe we'll get some lamb chops, and so that's helpful. And then my wife and I, the cowboy, the student intern, and then there's Flavie. Flavie came to us initially as a student intern by way of a U of A. I mean, it's a funny coincidence, and it's not that long a story, so I'll tell it. So U of A has a ranch up by Camp Verde, between Happy Jack and Camp Verde, called V-Bar-V. And at that time, there was an animal geneticist working there named Dave Schaefer. And Dave Schaefer, who has since left the V-Bar-V and went back to Colorado State, which, oh well, kind of a big loss to Arizona. But he called me one day and he said, I've got applications from 4 French agriculture students looking for a summer internship, and I've got room for 2. Do you want the other 2? And so I said, well, what do they know, or what can you tell me about them? He said, I don't know, I haven't met them, I'll send you their paperwork. So he did that. It was 2 young ladies. They came for the summer. They gave a glowing report of their experience to their classmates, and I've had a French intern every year since then, at least 1, sometimes 2. And then we've had interns we do a lot of interns. So they're usually college students looking for practical experience, and the best way to learn is learning by doing. And most of these, especially the students from France, have horse experience, but they don't have big, wide open spaces. They're mostly pretty small farms, so they do a lot of hunting and jumping and, you know, things. But for them to be able to ride 5 or 6 or 8 hours across a landscape where there's nobody out there, no road noise, and, you know, it's amazing for them. And so, back to Flavie. She came in 2013, did a 3-month internship, came back the next year and did a 6-month research internship on the meat at the meat lab with our animals, then applied for the PhD program in the School of Natural Resources at U of A, and is completing now her PhD in ecology, management, and restoration of rangelands. And her thesis is the grazing behavior and diet selection of Raramuri Criollo cattle and the effect or the resulting effect on meat flavor, quality, and tenderness. And so that has been a fabulous contribution. We provide a stipend for her as well, and then I think she's a quarter-time employee of the university as a research assistant. And then from time to time we get people that just show up and want to help. Sometimes that's a good deal and sometimes it's not. So we just play that one at a time, and sometimes they don't stay very long. Sometimes, you know, they kind of become part of the family. And then some of the people that might have been in these pictures could be my kids who still help out occasionally, and when they were a little bit younger, they were saying, no, we don't want anything to do with this. This is way too much work. And now they're saying, well, you know, Dad, I think about it a lot now, and I'm kind of and I'm like, hey, you know, you better hurry because I'm about to term out here. So in a week from today is my 50th wedding anniversary with this lady. And I was, of course, very young when she stole me out of the grocery cart as a mere child. But anyway, that's a long story. So, any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Do you do the USDA grass-fed certification?
We don't, we haven't, but I think it's a good thing. So we've been part of it's called SWGLA, Southwest Grass-Fed Livestock Association, and I was always hoping that we could get them to do a certification program that would be more appropriate for arid and semi-arid landscapes. But they ended up morphing with American Grass-Fed Association, and we thought about it, talked about it quite a bit. We've never acted on it, and I think that because we kind of got something that was working for us, and we said, well, we're using verifiable testing through the university, and with the association affiliation, you're often having to send things out, and it just seemed like it was easier for us to do this. But I wouldn't dissuade anyone from doing that. I think they're a wonderful organization, and I think they can do a lot of good.
So, if I might, what marketing, what nomenclature do you put on your meat? What do you call it?
I call it all-natural range-fed beef. We decided we were calling it grass-fed for a long time, and then we said, wait a minute, in reality, it's not just grasses that they eat. They're eating pine trees. In the winter, they eat prickly pear, thorns and all. In what we call the pre-monsoon, it's almost all mesquite. And then we've got over 200 different plants that showed up through our fecal analysis, consumed by these cattle. So I feel that that's a pretty good descriptor. And then when people say, well, what do you mean by all natural? And they're often very, kind of challenging, defensive postures. I'll say, well, no hormones, no antibiotics, no confinement, except when we wean the calves. We only purchase outside feed to the sheep during the time just before they're lambing, when a deficiency in protein would decrease their wool quality or affect the developing fetus. And some years we'll use an all-natural supplement tub that comes from Vitalix, a company in Nebraska. I can't remember the town. Anyway, but so we're very clear about how we do every step. And if they have a question about some practice, we answer. We don't use the synthetic hormones for growth stimulants. We're all natural. So we do vaccinate the calves at branding for Clostridium perfringens type C and D, and that includes a tetanus toxoid, and it's a 7 or 8 way vaccination, and it's a one-time for life vaccination. And then the heifers that we decide we're going to retain to go into the herd get a vaccination at the time that we select them, which would be prior to the breeding season, and that's a once-in-a-lifetime vaccine that primarily prevents some the reproductive diseases that cause spontaneous abortion, so it prevents that. So, and I'm blanking on that name, but I'll remember in a second. So, other questions?
A lot of your pictures are filtered, they look like paintings. What is that?
I take them with a digital camera. A lot of them are just iPhone photos. But I use a program, an app, a free app called Snapseed. So when your digital camera takes an image, there's millions of images, millions of pixels that are in that image. And a program like Snapseed allows you to adjust the contrast, allows you to do what's called saturation, so you can allow, so like having a volume knob on the color pixels, so you can crank them up a little bit or down, and that makes them more, like what I think is more vivid. So.
Very nice.
You bet. And then there was a couple of images in there that had like compass headings and GPS stuff. That's another fabulous free app called Theodolite, and it allows you to do repeat photography. And I didn't mention that when I was talking about monitoring, but I can go to the exact same location and take the exact same photograph a year later or 6 months later or pre-monsoon and post-monsoon, and then that image is, it's dated with a timestamp and the whole bit, and so it's very, it makes it credible. It's not like, well, last year we had da-da-da-da-da. No, here's the photos that will show what it was.
Theodolite?
Theodolite. It's the name of an old surveying instrument.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Okay.